a while now. How did you get involved with them?
Well, it's kind of a long story. You know, I retired from law enforcement in 2000. I flew helicopters back in the Vietnam era, and it was just out of flying for a long time. I started hanging out here at the Arlington Air Show back in '97 or '98. I was fairly convinced I was going to do something like a light airplane, a Kit Fox or something like that. And the longer I hung out, the more I realized that was kind of above my pay grade and technical ability in terms of being able to put it together. And I think about 1999, my mom was here with me, and she said, "Hey, why don't you go take a ride in one of these powered parachutes?" And I thought it was kind of a silly thing. But she walked over to actually this Randy Sneed, who used to be with Buckeye Powered Parachutes, and gave him $25, and I went up for a ride and fell in love with it. And ended up purchasing one from Dan Bailey from Six Shooter clear back in the year 2000, and been with it ever since.
Yeah, but you just didn't end up purchasing one. You ended up purchasing the whole company.
Yeah, boy, I had no intentions of doing that. I flunked retirement, is what I say. So I did retire in 2000, and I purchased one. I got it back down to Vancouver, Washington, and they're just like magnets. People started lining up and wanting rides. I had a commercial pilot's license, and so it was fairly easy for me to transition to a position of helping instruct. And Dan Bailey back then, who was the founder of Six Shooter Powered Parachutes, clear back to 1991, said, "Hey, we don't have a sales representative down there in Vancouver." So again, I had no intentions of really getting very serious about the business side, but signed on with Dan to be a Six Shooter sales representative. And back in that particular time, the market was darn hot. And
I worked with Rotax, and at one time they were shipping 200 engines a month out to powered parachute manufacturers.
Yeah, well, and I tell you, in the peak years with Six Shooter, Dan Bailey was doing, I don't know, about 250 to 300 a year out of Yakima. We've done now, we're working towards the 3,000 units that have been sold around the world. So there was just kind of a proliferation. And again, kind of my story back at that time, I started as a sales representative and started doing fairly well selling them. I couldn't quite keep up with things, brought on a couple of business partners. And then when Sport Pilot hit, I was in a good position to become a certified flight instructor. I'm an FAA flight examiner. So I opened the Western Sport Pilot Association, which is kind of an affiliation of training that is focused not only on powered parachutes, but also weight shift and airplane. And then Dan, a very good friend, worked with him as a kind of a partner for many years. He was getting towards the point in his life where he decided he wanted to slow down a little bit, and found 3 other partners, and over a period of about 3 or 4 years worked out a deal with Dan. Now Dan is still with us. We call him our consultant. There isn't a day that goes by, even though he doesn't have a specific financial interest in the company at this point. If a customer calls in to our toll-free line, you're just as likely to get Dan Bailey as you are anyone else on our team right now. So he's still heavily involved. But he did give up ownership. We've moved the factory up to a 5,000 square foot hangar at Pangbourne Memorial Airport in East Wenatchee. And we're kind of decentralized. We do flight operations over here. I do marketing out of the Portland, Vancouver area. We do the parts and the manufacturing up in Wenatchee. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Now, how many models of your aircraft are you currently producing?
So let me start with the beginning. I mean, we've done dozens of models over the year, and always kind of a distinctive look. Some folks like the look, some don't. As we started working through the Sport Pilot transition, working to be one of the few manufacturers left who can manufacture a light sport-powered parachute, Dan settled on a design that to the best of our ability, we were going to try to stick with for several years, to standardize parts and to just help facilitate the certification with the FAA. So we produced one model. It's called the Six Shooter Legend, and we have 3 different configurations, and we'll see that in a minute. So there's one model. You can order that Legend as a single seat, Part 103, or a 2-seat tandem with a 582, or you can put a 912 engine on it. We call that model of Legend XL the Paragon. So there's really only 3. There's one model line, Legend XL, 3 configurations. It's called the P103, or the Legend XL Tandem, or the Legend XL Paragon, if you put the 912 engine on it.
So let's have a look at the first one, which I believe is the Ultralight category, isn't it?
That's correct.
Okay. So this is the unit here?
This is it.
So this is what, powered by a little 503 Rotax?
Yes. Yes, so this is a 503 air-cooled engine. Kind of an interesting transition here, because Rotax, this has been kind of the workhorse of the ultralight industry for years and years. Rotax recently took the 503 out of production, so they're no longer producing the Rotax 447 or the 503 engine. So we've got a few left, but we're also at this point looking at alternative engines. We're looking at the Kawasaki 440 compact radial out of Vancouver, BC. But again, this is the Legend Airframe. And what's fairly distinctive on the Legend designs compared to many other powered parachutes, kind of the older model 6-shooters and other manufacturers, you see twin frame rails, and then the rest of the airframe is built on that. So Dan went with a single aluminum spar that runs from front to back, and then in this case we top it with an aluminum deck. On our 103 model, we top it with a fiberglass deck. Now this one's actually special light sport certified. We did that on purpose so that we could actually train legally to sport pilot level in a single seat. Our 103 model comes standard with a 503 engine. We use a Barnstormer 360 canopy, and in this case a Tennessee wood prop, kind of minimal instrumentations, and just kind of a comfortable little sports car-like powered parachute to fly.
It looks like a suspension on it as well.
It does, yeah. So, like many of the other manufacturers, years ago we were using the kind of the single fiberglass spring rod suspension. I think it was about 1998, 1999. Dan went with the full spring suspension. So this takes a healthy bumpy landing and keeps on flying. Just nice and simple, nice and sturdy, pretty cost effective, and you go through fewer fiberglass rods with that kind of a suspension system.
And it's got a nice protection loop around the propeller as well.
Yes. Got to show you this propeller too. This is kind of one of my favorite propellers out, actually.
That's the Tennessee wood propeller.
Yeah, Tennessee wood prop. It's just a great looking propeller.
And they've been around for a long time.
Been around for a long time. It looks good. It sounds good. It sounds like a real airplane when you're flying the darn thing. And it comes of course, it's not an adjustable propeller, so they sell it to you pitched for the particular engine. So like with our composite props, you're not having to kind of mess with adjusting that thing initially to get it set up. Really a fairly simple design. And again, if you take a look at a 6-shooter that was made clear back in 91 or 92 and set it next to one of these, the fan guard is fairly distinctive, and you could tell it's a 6-shooter, distinctive from other manufacturers. They just have a look all their own.
Now, what kind of performance would the average pilot get out of this airplane? Say a guy 180 pounds with the type of shooting the power that you've got.
Yeah, so generally I'd say you're going to be off the ground in 100 to 300 feet in no wind conditions. And with this 503 and the Barnstormer 360 or a Barnstormer 400, you're probably going to get an average of 400 to 500 feet a minute in climb rate. Really fairly spectacular. People who solo on these the first time often say they didn't take their first breath for the first 3 minutes of their flight.
Now, how does it compare to the two places as far as control systems and feel and takeoff distance and that type of thing?
Yeah, so the single seat performs, or it controls it. We fly it the same way we would with a 2-seat. It's just lighter, it's more nimble. And so when prospective buyers are coming up and kind of looking for that comparison, and anyone with motorcycle experience, I say this would be like riding a Kawasaki dirt bike, and our 2-seat is more like a Honda Goldwing or something. That's kind of the road bike. So it's a little heavier, still good performing because you step up in horsepower. So it'll carry a little bit more, but this is quicker turning. The canopy kites up a little bit quicker, and it has a little bit sportier feel to it than when you start transitioning to a 2-seat, where you're flying up, upward of gross weights of 1,000 pounds at that point.
But the advantage of this, of course, is that someone that's lost a medical or that doesn't need a pilot's license, there's a lot of things economic-wise that this aircraft would fit a lot more people.
Well, both of these. So yes, you know, with our single seat, that can fall if you purchase it our standard Part 103 single seat. That falls under FAA Part 103, and legally, Part 103 would say that there is no minimum age requirement, there's no medical requirement, technically there's no training requirement. Now that said, we don't sell them without training. That's just not a good idea. But that's kind of minimalist flying, and with very little bureaucracy. You step into two-seaters now, and it does require an FAA student pilot's license or sport pilot's license. But that said, it does not require a medical. You can use your driver's license instead of a medical. And the sport pilot course in a powered parachute is a total of 12 hours, 10 hours of dual flight instruction, 2 hours of solo, FAA written test, and a flight test with an examiner. So relatively speaking, even when you're getting into a two-seat and you want to carry passengers, you look at the training requirements and the training costs compared to getting into general aviation, and relatively easier, and I would say considerably less expensive.
So let's go have a look at some of the two-seats then.
Okay.
So this is the two-seat that fits into the light sport category?
This is the Legend XL tandem, meaning two seats, with Rotax 582, and it does in fact fall into the sport pilot category. It requires at least an FAA student pilot's license to fly it solo, or a sport pilot's license if you're going to be flying passengers.
Now it looks like you've got a lot of protection around you as you're flying this as well.
This is actually optional. We're one of the few manufacturers where the frontal bars are not an integral part of the airframe. It's something that in some cases appeals to a large market, the six-shooters without the frontal bars, because we have a lot of folks who are photographers. And when you're in the air with one of these, it's essentially hands-off flying. So having kind of an unencumbered view is popular. Others kind of like these because it's a bit of a safety blanket. You know, if they feel like they're ever going to fly into a tree or something like that, this is just
like that, yeah.
that's just kind of a safety blanket. So you know, in this case, it does. It's a nice protection if you had an inadvertent rollover on the ground, or weren't flying the way that we taught you and ended up in a fence or a tree.
Now you talk about teaching. The pilot sitting in the second seat is elevated so that he's got a good view of what's going on.
Yeah, and so you know, this is an experimental. We don't have the dual controls on this. We'll show you one of those in just a moment. But in our dual control units, the instructor is actually sitting back here with a full set of dual controls, and often even your first flight on our instructor units, your first flight is up here in the front seat, and the instructor is actually controlling the entire aircraft from the back. If you're a passenger back there, again, you do sit up a bit higher, and your feet are outside of mine, and you get a little bit better view. You can kind of look over the shoulder right at the instrument panel, and see, you get a great view of what's going on.
Now, when you talk about controls on this, how do you control this airplane, for example, on the ground?
Yeah, so this is a little bit deceptive. If we're talking to even prospective pilots, they'll tend to stand here and think, okay, this is how you turn it. The only purpose of this stick is to keep us tracking straight on the ground while we're kiting the canopy. Once you're in the air, it's hands-off flying. The stick has no function at all. So once we're in the air, we're actually steering with our feet. You step right, this is a steering line that comes up to a set of lines at the back side of your canopy, so you step right, it drags the canopy down, and around you go. Likewise, if you want to go left, you step left, steering line up to the canopy. We have what's called intuitive control, so on the ground, left is left and right is right. The throttle in a powered parachute has nothing to do with airspeed like it does in an airplane. We think of this as altitude control because we fly at a constant speed of 28 miles an hour. So if I'm at full throttle, I'm flying about 28 miles an hour, but climbing. If I'm idling, or if we were to lose an engine, I'm still flying at 28 miles an hour. So I think of this as altitude control.
So that's an elevator then?
This is up, and this is down. So once we get you in the air, it's not all that difficult. Right is right, left is left, up and down. So the learning curve, particularly in the air, is relatively quick. Probably technically the most difficult part of flying one of these is just learning how to lay the canopy out properly, getting it kited during the initial takeoff run, And even that said, a couple of lessons at the field with us in the morning, you'll feel like an expert with kiting the canopy, and then again in the air, relatively quick and easy training once we get you in the air.
Now you talk about canopy, I'm presuming that's the parachute that's over your head. Is there different sizes or different types of canopies for different
well, we
applications?
yeah, so we use the Performance Design series of canopies because they have gone through the FAA process, and we use 4 different size canopies. On the single seat that we just saw, we start with the Barnstormer 360. It's a real snappy little canopy. You look up, it's a little bit heart-throbbing. Sometimes you look up and it doesn't look like a large wing up there, but it's very snappy, kites very easily. If you're a little bit heavier, you want just a little more lifting power on that single seat, we step up to a 400, Barnstormer 400. On this tandem seat, the standard canopy, and it's really flying on most manufacturer models, it's flying all around the world, is the Sunriser 500. And that has a lifting capacity of 1,000 to 1,100 pounds. And again, a very easy to handle canopy, very docile. It's a rectangular canopy. You may hear the difference between rectangular and elliptical. It's a good performing canopy, and again, it's more docile than trying to handle an elliptical canopy. You want a little bit more lifting capacity, then you can go as high as a Sunriser 550 square foot canopy. Again, that's a rectangular canopy, a little bit more fabric to handle, but a little bit more lifting capacity.
Now, what's this big bag on the side for?
Well, this is your wing, or this is where the wing is stored. So this is just a canopy storage sack, and
so it just rides on the side of the powered parachute, I guess, when you've got it stored, you're coming out into the field?
Yeah, so we put it here. After you land, you stuff it in the canopy. We put it up here just as a convenient place to carry it, and it just allows the passenger and the pilot to stay in the cockpit while you're taxiing.
Now, what is this unit that's right above it with all the holes in it?
Yeah, so this is an adjuster for center of gravity. So in flight, we want to be flying with our nose wheel 8 to 12 inches nose high. The passenger sits right at the center of gravity. You think about this on a teeter-totter. So it doesn't matter whether you don't have anyone in the back seat or you got a 400-pounder in the back seat. There's no adjustment for this. But you do have to adjust for that in-flight attitude based on pilot weight. So if you had a little heavier pilot up front, you'd tend to be nose low, and what you need to do is move the center of gravity forward to get the nose up. And the way that you do that with this particular system is to undo these 2 quick links and move it forward. Likewise, if you had a little lighter pilot on board, you'd be a little bit too nose high. You'd want to move the center of gravity back, and so the rapid links would detach and you move those back. So it's really a quick couple minutes in the field and adjust for pilot weight.
Now again, you've got good suspension on this one.
Yes.
And you got some big beefy tires on it too.
I do, and these are standard. We went to these actually in with the SR7 series in the late 90s. And so kind of a sturdy turf tire, same spring suspension system. That's again very functional. Takes a hard landing. We teach our people not to land hard, but if they happen to do that, it takes a beating.
And how much fuel are you able to carry on this unit?
You know, under light sport rules, there are no maximum fuel capacities now. So our standard tank in this model was 12 gallons. You'll see in our other model that we can step clear up to a 15-gallon aluminum tank now.
Now, how long would that give the average person flight time-wise?
These Rotax engines burn on the average of 3.5 to 4 gallons an hour, again, just depending on how much load you have. So you're looking at 2 to 2.5 hours of flight time with about a half an hour reserve. We fly at 28 miles an hour. We use 92 octane auto fuel. So not without expense, but again, relatively speaking, compared to general aviation engines, it's pretty efficient.
Now we move to the back of the engine, and you've got one big massive propeller here by the looks of it.
Yeah, we do. This is a power fin. It's a Type F blade. It's a little thicker blade, We step up. Some of the owners just like to step up to this 5-blade prop because you get a little bit more thrust, and because it's a Type F blade, there's a different gear reduction. So this it's a 3-4-7 gear reduction, slows the prop down a little bit, which you can do because you get the equivalent thrust from having 5 blades and a little bit thicker. So it runs, I think, a little bit smoother. It's just a tad bit quieter, and it's kind of a sexy prop. It's an expensive setup, but it's a...
And behind that, we've got the Rotax Bluehead 582.
We do. It's a Bluehead 582, dual ignition system. It's oil injected. These are 2-stroke. This happens to be a 2-stroke engine, so you have to premix gas and oil, but you don't have to premix it here because of the automatic oil injection. It's water cooled, dual ignition, dual carb. A lot of redundancy in these engines to keep them safe.
And I see this has got the e-drive on it, it's got the electric start on the back as well.
Yeah, and this is really a heavy-duty gearbox. We use the Type B gearbox on our 503 engine. When you step up to the 582, we step up to this E gearbox with that built-in electric start. A lot of our market is kind of the baby boomer market, and they just kind of like sitting in that cockpit and turning that key and using that electric start instead of the old pull start that we used to use a lot.
Now, we talked a little bit about training. We've got a unit here that's got the dual controls on it as well.
We do.
Let's have a look at it.
Okay.
This looks like a real big boy here.
Yeah, this looks like a monster compared to our little one. That said, it's really the airframe is very similar to the Tandem that we just looked at. This is a Legend XL. We dubbed this model the Paragon because it's got the 912 engine on it. And we've done something unique. We've raised the outriggers. The outriggers are what hold the canopy on, and we moved that to a super high attachment point. So we call this our Halo system. We actually developed this for a couple of our overseas customers who were flying observation utility lines, and they wanted the higher attachment points. They wanted kind of an unencumbered way to get into the back seat, and so we sold several of these overseas. Our instructors like it too. This happens to be an instructor unit with full dual controls. So the instructor would be back here, and you can see that his feet would be up here, interconnected to the steering bars. His throttle is right next to him, and then he's also got ground steering. And because of the Halo, you can see that the instructor access from the side is really quite easy to get into and out of the aircraft. There's another popular option on this. Normally our instruments on the 6-shooter are down on the deck here, particularly on our instructor units. We move this up to kind of we call this a heads-up display. So really all of our checklists are right here. Nice instrument system. Grand Rapids electronic information system.
And that's a U.S. manufactured system as well.
That's correct. That's correct. So this has just become really quite popular with our instructor crowd.
Now, I'm 5'6". There's other people out there, 6 feet. Is there any adjustability built into the aircraft for different pilots?
For feet?
For feet, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look down, you'd have to get down kind of low, but these steering bars adjust forward or backward depending on how much leg room that you need. So we've got about 12 inches from the back setting clear to the front setting.
Okay, so we've got a 912 on this. Let's go back and have a look at it.
Okay.
Now, what is the advantage of the 912?
Well, I got to tell you, the primary advantage happens to be the fact that it's a 4-stroke engine. So people would say much more dependable maybe than a 2-stroke engine, more like an automobile engine. Particularly for instructor applications, this is rated at 2,000 hours between overhaul. Kind of the standard Rotax 2-stroke engine is rated at about 350 hours between overhaul. When you start, particularly for instructor applications, when you start kind of penciling out how much it's going to cost you per operating hour, this tends to be a real advantage. The other advantage is just the horsepower. The rated horsepower on that Rotax 582 is 65. We happen to use the Rotax 912 UL engine as our standard installation. It's 80 horse. We can also step up to the 100 horse. What we have tended to discover by test flying all of those, you've got kind of a light airframe with this Legend XL. So 100 horsepower is a lot of horsepower in a fairly light weight aircraft. And so we sell very few within the 100 horse. The 80 horsepower is breathtaking enough for us. It's a lot of aircraft to handle. So more horsepower, more lifting capacity, considerably more time between overhaul, and because of the nature of the engine, that is a 4-stroke, it's just much more dependable.
And you got a fuel economy thing there as well. I'm flying on a 912. I'm using 2.5 gallons an hour at cruise, whereas I'm 4 to 6 gallons an hour when I'm working the 582.
Yeah, exactly. And then on this aircraft, we've this is the upgraded tank. So we've gone to this round aluminum tank. This happens to be a 15-gallon tank. The standard tank is a round polyplastic tank that's 10 gallons. And then a step up from that is going to the aluminum 10 or 12. And then again, for our instructor applications, these guys are out here flying all day, and so they like those that additional gas.
And I see you've got a 3-blade warp drive propeller on this one.
Three-blade warp drive. So we're using actually 3 different props. Ivo prop is a standard prop that we use. You saw the Tennessee wood prop that's standard on our 103. And then Powerfin is the primary blade that we use on our Legend XL, and even on the Paragon model. Some of the buyers just prefer one prop over another for one reason or another. This buyer happens to own one with the warp drive.
Okay, so it looks like we've got a single place, we've got a 2-place, we've got a 2-place that's a little bigger with a 912 engine on. How do they all come out to the public? Like, how are you offering these to the public?
Well, yeah, just starting with the Ultralight, the 103, you can buy that fully assembled by one of our dealers, or you can buy it as a kit. Now, the other end of the spectrum is Special Light Sport certified. Special Light Sport certified implies that it has to be fully assembled by the factory. We do the engine preparation, the chute rigging, we do a production test flight, and we even do the certification. So only the manufacturers now who do a Special Light Sport who can offer experimental light sport. So we do offer all of our models in experimental light sport. Even if you purchase an experimental light sport, you can contract with us to do the build. But we are one of the few manufacturers that offers our powered parachutes in total kit form. So this entire aircraft comes in about 3 boxes. A lot of pre-assembly done, but that said, you're looking at an 80 to 100 hour project to assemble the airframe, mount the engine. We've got quite a set of assembly manuals and, of course, maintenance manuals and all of the other manuals that are required for light sport manufacturers. But I would say about half of the purchasers have no interest or really much skill in putting things together, so contract with us to do it. A lot of our international sales are because of the economy of shipping. We've got dealers all around the world, and they prefer to buy in kit, so we're shipping kind of boxes of aircraft around, and we've got the representatives in various countries and the United States. Some are kind of the amateur builders, and they just enjoy the process of taking it out of the box from scratch and being hands-on and ultimately flying something that they put together personally.
So I'm up in Ontario, Canada, and I want to buy one of your airplanes. Do you have a dealer network or something set up so I can buy one, I can get training, I can get parts and pieces, that type of thing?
Yeah, we do. We've got actually about three different levels of dealer network. There are some areas of the United States and there's some areas of the world where there just is no support at all. So in those cases, you just deal direct with the factory. And even in other parts of the United States or other parts of the world, if you find yourself in an area where there's no training, we manage an affiliate training organization called the Western Sport Pilot Association, and we've flown instructors all around the world. And kind of the next level is if you've got a dealer next to you, then we'll and you make an inquiry to us. We'll give that dealer a heads up, and you get a personal call from that dealer, and then all of the sale, the customer support that goes with the sale, the maintenance, the training, and everything is up to that representative in that region. We've got fewer, over the years, we've tried to get away from the single dealer model just because there's so much that goes into this. So we use flight centers, and there's a kind of, you may have heard of Piper or Cessna flight centers. We're not quite that sophisticated, but the idea is the same. So a flight center is a place where you can go and actually see new and used 6-shooters. You can fly, you can be trained by one or more instructors. You don't have to own an aircraft before you fly at our flight center. So we've got a flight center up in the northeast United States. We've got 2 in the southwest. This air show happens to be at the Arlington Ultralight Center, and one of our flight centers is Seattle Powered Parachutes, probably our most active flight center in the United States. So this is a place that you can come. We've got 2 certified flight instructors. We've got an examiner on site. We've got several aircraft to fly. You can go through your entire sport pilot training program right here at Seattle Powered Parachutes, and you don't have to own first. If you decide to purchase, they've got an active inventory of new and used aircraft, and so you would not be dealing directly with the factory if you're up in the Puget Sound area here, for instance.
So if somebody wanted to get a hold of you direct to talk to you about your product or services, what's the easiest way to do that?
Yeah, we've got a toll-free number now, so you can get that right, 888-727-1998, or we've had the same website for over 20 years, sixchuter.com. That's SIXCHUTER.com.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.